This is a quick tutorial on retexturing the Fox avatar with the Substance Painter project file that I have included. I've already configured this project with all the necessary layers, and with Substance Painter, many people will say it's just like Photoshop, but then you look at it and it looks nothing like Photoshop. In some ways, in certain principles, yes, specifically with the way how it blends layers together. So I have a Photoshop image loaded here of one of the avatars I made here. And you'll notice it's just a flat 2D image of a model with all its colors and its colors only. And where Substance Painter shares a similarity is the way how you can blend two layers together. So if you notice that I have this one right here, which is set to a linear burn of 50%. So if I turn this on, you'll notice that you'll see some shadows that are applied to the color. So this is all just the way how it affects the colors. And I have these AO maps, or ambient occlusion maps, which I generated when I modeled these in ZBrush, so that it creates kind of like a shadow layer so that I can apply it to a flat 2D color layer. So with the Fox here, I basically included the same thing. So here you'll notice that here's a 3D image of the Fox. In order for you to move around, it's all focused on the Alt key on your keyboard. So if I hold down Alt, left click will allow me to rotate around the Fox. Alt click middle mouse allows me to pan. Alt click right click allows me to zoom in and out. And over here you'll have a 2D representation of a texture layer that I currently have selected over here. So this texture set list here, just so you can kind of point it out and see it here. If you don't see this window, just go up to Window, Use. You'll either see Texture Set List, Texture Settings. The important three panels you want to have here is Texture Set List, Layers, and the properties based on whatever it is you select, either a layer or a texture set. These texture sets are basically the specific, probably the easiest thing to, it's very similar to materials. In Blender and also in Unity, you'll have this little ball shape that represents a material for the avatar. And so these are basically the same thing. These are the materials or texture sets or UV maps. Currently, this Fox has 8 materials or texture sets. Usually they recommend only having about 1, maybe up to 4, just to be optimized. And I made the mistake of separating them all separately. But if you're a PC user and like to take advantage of having different texture sets, you can apply a shader to each one of these in Unity to have some kind of crazy special effect if you want to. But since we're just only focusing here on recoloring, customizing it to, say, your persona, we can go through each one of these one by one. So if I select the brow has 2 layers. So right here is the original layer. And if I go down to the properties of this layer, there are 2 pieces of texture that I have put here. So this is the color or diffuse or albedo. They're all the same. This is the base, and then this is the normal map, which has all the bump mapping information, which is already set there. Above that, I have this ambient occlusion layer, which has shadow information that I've generated. Right now it's hidden because I left that there for you to apply this to your own custom eyebrow. So if you want to create your own eyebrow without messing with the original, go ahead and insert a paint layer or right in between these two. So if I just add this little paintbrush icon, it'll create a paint layer, a blank one. And from here, since I have the brush already selected here, we're going to paint. You'll notice that there's no like color palette here, and it's all right here in properties. So much like how in Photoshop you mess with the brush size, the flow, stroke opacity, spacing, things like that are all done here, but also changing the color of the brush is pretty much all the way here to the bottom where it says base color. If you click on this white bar, or actually right here, okay, there we go. If you click on the bar, you can change the color. So wanted, blue eyebrows, for example. So we got this layer selected. We can go ahead and paint on the model. You can also paint down here as well if you want, which is a nice way of kind of painting on 2D if you're more familiar with that. You notice I switched something right here, which is symmetry. And you notice now that there's this red line on the fox. By default, this is probably not going to be on. So make sure you turn that on first if you're working on symmetry. But the one area where you should never use symmetry is the hair on top, because that is an asymmetrical shape. So if you're going to recolor that, I recommend turning this off when you're working on this hair material right here. But for pretty much all the other stuff, it's all basically symmetrical, with the exception of the tail, but there's still symmetry running through it. The only problem you'll have is that when you're painting on the tail, it's going to be hard to create stripes or patterns. So you're probably going to want to have to turn off symmetry and try to do everything by hand on the tail, because the geometry is asymmetrical just specifically on the tail. But otherwise it works for the most part on everywhere else. Maybe here. But yeah, that's how you recolor for the eyebrows. And then once you recolor an area here on the texture set, you can turn this on to apply shadows. You're probably not going to see much, but what you probably want to do is that if you want to see how much detail is being, or shadows are being applied, because you'll notice that on this model there's lighting going on. You'll see there's some kind of light source somewhere off here. If you select material here, change the lighting to single channel to just base color, and it turns off all the lighting, so it's just flat. And you're basically just seeing flat colors. If you notice in the fox, there's all these shaded areas. That's all flat color. That's no lighting at all. That's just painted in. So it's not actually lighting, it's just color. So if you turn this on, you're not going to see much change there. But say if we switch to the fox here, we're going to create a new paint layer, and we're going to paint this one as well. One way you can change your brush size is if you hold down the Control key and left click, and I think it's slide left or right. There we go. Okay, right click. So if you hold down Control and right click left or right, moving the mouse button left or right will change the brush size. So that's Control, right click, and then drag your mouse left or right to change the size. So we can go ahead and paint the fox here. We can turn on symmetry. And this is just to show an example of how the shadow maps can affect your paint textures. So say, for example, you have like a very generic blue looking fox here. You notice he looks rather flat. If you want that, you can do without this, but the problem is that in certain VR chat worlds where there's absolutely no lighting at all, it's just flat coloring everywhere, it's very cartoon anime things like that. Or if you're using a toon shader on your avatar, it's going to ignore any world lighting and instead just turn the lighting up on everything around your character up to 100%. So you're pretty much going to get something like this. And it doesn't really look too good if you want to have, just maybe just a little bit of detail or, some kind of form to your character, your avatar. That's why I included this layer here, this shadows ambient occlusion layer. So if I turn it on, you'll see that it adds some depth to it. And of course, if your character doesn't have a toon shader but is, lit by the world, of course it'll look a lot more better, like it'll have depth to it, if you want that. But other than that, I've included this there to give you some detail. Right now it's set to 50% with a linear burn, or you can change it to, in the blend mode, like multiply, divide, which kind of flips it. It's the opposite. If you want that effect, here are a few other blending options. So it's kind of like changing the blend settings here on Photoshop. So if you have this layer selected here, you can change to different blend settings. So this is where it shares that same similarity with Photoshop, is that you can change to different blend settings so that you can blend this shadow layer to the repaint that you have here. You can also do is select this tool here, Polygon Fill, and you can select all the polygons to white everything out. And then you can just kind of repaint things depending on what you want. So you can control, slide the mouse with the right click button. Right down here in the properties paint, you can change the settings of the brush, or you can add other alpha shapes or textures in there to put in interesting patterns like a stamp. Maybe you have a stamp or a tattoo of your character. You can just basically click that or stamp that on here. So you can mess around with a lot of settings here in Substance Painter to give your character a unique texture or something like that. You can switch to materials so you can see the lighting, so maybe that gives you some depth to help you know where you're painting, where your patterns go, things like that. Once you've painted everything on the body, the hair, the paws, the teeth, the tongue, they all have their ambient layers here that you can turn on and use. So once you have everything set, you want to export all these textures so that you can bring them into Unity. So with the Unity project, the only thing you have to do is you don't have to bring in a new model or anything like that. All you have to do is import the new texture images that you create here. So from here, the only thing we need to export is export textures. So once you've painted all your textures and made them all and it looks good, you can export all of those textures right here, export textures, and you'll see you have all the texture sets here. And for each one, it'll have different output maps for base color, roughness, metallics, normals, heights, emissive. We're just going to ignore all of these except for the first one, which is base color. So we have that for the brow. For the claws, turn off everything except for the first one, base color. Same thing with the eyes. We're only worried about the base color, because all of these other things, like specifically, like we don't really use roughness, metallics, normals, unless you know how to use that or want to use, or the normal map, there's nothing to change about that because that's just a bump map detail. We're only worried about base colors here, since we're only doing a basic recolor of the fox. So make sure you do that for all of them. If the tongue is still pink, you probably don't need to export that. Only worry about textures that you for sure changed. So, maybe the tongue you didn't even change. The teeth are still the same. The paws are black. Same thing with the claws. Just only worry about exporting things that you change, which are more than likely are going to be, you know, unless you have colored eyebrows. I think with most people, they're either going to change the eyes, the body, and the hair, which are probably those three things that most people are going to recolor. So once you've selected all of those base colors, just go ahead and export all of those textures. Before you do, though, you probably want to rename these or set their destination. Right here, you'll see a list of exports. If you click up here, it'll show all the things you're going to be exporting. You can just go ahead and export those, and it's going to save it, but sometimes it just doesn't even tell you where it goes. So if you go up here, Open Output Directory, it'll open up an Explorer window and shows you where it dumped everything. So you can go over there and once you have that window open, make sure you drag all of these image textures into the Unity project with the Fox avatar, and then just slot in these new textures into the existing materials. So basically you're just replacing the albedo texture on the Fox material so that it's recolored to your Fox. And that's pretty much it. So hopefully that answers a lot of questions as far as how to use Substance Painter, repainting it, and then exporting those so you can open them in Unity. If you have any questions, just contact me on Telegram or on my Discord group.